Welcome to the Business of Hearing podcast, the podcast for high-performing hearing care clinics that want to learn the strategies, ideas, and truths behind some of the smartest private practice clinics in the world. Now, time for your hosts, Phil M. Jones and Ollie Luke.
So here we are, right? Officially end of summer camp, and it's good to be here. I am excited beyond belief to be able to introduce today's very special guest. I know we're going to have one heck of a conversation over the next 75 minutes. And thank you to all of you who are here and live with us in this moment. As always, know that your contributions are welcome. So please join in on the chat. Please do everything you possibly can to raise some of your questions, and I'll make sure that your questions are answered through this session here today, making sure that we make the most of the time that we have together. But most importantly, instead of listening to me, let me introduce you to our brilliant guest for today, Mr. Codi Shewan. Codi, welcome to the show.
Phil, thank you so much for having me. Thanks for inviting me to the inner circle today.
Pleasure to have you here, and it's fun, right? I'm reading your bio and looking at some of the things in your backstory. We know each other quite well from our work we kind of cross into together, and I find it funny that you spent 20 years of your career in the death care profession, right? And then what we have is we have a world of people in our inner circle that spend their time in the death care profession. I thought it was funny that those two things would align. It's just a simple TH to an F as a difference means a very, very different thing. So Codi, why don't you just tell us a very quick amount about yourself and your backstory for anybody who's on the call right now who's been too lazy to understand who you really are.
Well, you hit the first nail on the head, the one that people are most curious about, and that is 20 years as a funeral director and embalmer. I started off on the front lines working in the funeral home, even before that as a co-op student, and then worked my way up in corporate funeral service in Canada and worked for a funeral home. We served about 25,000 families annually. And I think the biggest takeaway from that, what I realized was that, we had this definition of legacy all wrong. I was surrounded by death every day. And a lot of people would think that's a macabre sense of reality. And the truth is, it actually taught me everything that I know about life. Some of, the lessons that I hold so dear and that I employ every single day came from that 20-year experience. So now I find myself as a speaker, a consultant, and as of February of this year, like yourself, an author. So that's sort of been the career journey. And, every day is filled with excitement. And I'm blessed. I'm filled with perspective that I'm fortunate to be able to do what I get to do with great colleagues like yourself.
So you wrote a book, right, called Everyday Legacy. And a giant part of what you now talk about of your work is redefining what legacy means. So why don't we start by you trying to help me understand your definition of legacy?
Yeah, easy. Legacy is something that we are programmed to believe, either consciously or even subconsciously, that is there once we're gone, once we're dead, that it's something we leave behind after we're here. And I would say that, and I read about this in the book, one of the things that really enlightened me was this funeral of an older gentleman. And, I'd heard thousands of funerals before this one, but there I was standing outside of the chapel over listening to the service on the speakers above. And there was just something about the way these folks were describing him, this gregarious personality, this fun-loving spirit, this generous, loyal, loving heart. And there was just something that really resonated about him. I guess it was probably because he was of a grandfatherly age, and, my grandfather had passed away years before. So there's just something that really resonated. And people were sharing stories, eulogies, and there were all these emotions that happened throughout the service, tears of laughter, tears from obviously their loss. And I remember having this distinct moment, almost like a lightning bolt moment, where I went, gosh, I really hope this guy knows the impact that he had in the world and that he had on the people in this room. And if he wasn't aware, if he could rewind time, and if he were aware, would he double that impact? Would he double down in really magnificent ways and really change the world? And I realized that with that one little shift from something we leave to something we live, we become consciously aware of how we show up in the world. And it can really shift our purpose, which is my definition of legacy. Legacy and purpose are very synonymous for me.
So I was very inspired by so many of the stories through the book. What we didn't manage to be able to catch on, though, in that environment is examples of things that people do on a regular basis that would be an example of them not living their legacy, an example of them perhaps doing something that isn't going to result in them having the purposeful life that they would want for. What are some of the things that you've come across, some of the things that people have perhaps regrets about, etc.? What are the warning signs for the fact that you might not be living your life on purpose?
Yeah, well, I mean, the regrets piece, there's a whole chapter dedicated to that called Echoes of Regret. You know, I'd sit around the arrangement table, and there'd be people saying, I wish I had, I wish I hadn't, I wish I could, I wish I might have. And the whole time I'm thinking, gosh, you know, you could have. And so this idea of living your legacy, or these times when we realize we're out of sync, is really when we consider alignment, and we consider those values that are most important to us. And the easy way that I encourage people to do this is, and we can do it right now with the 20 folks and you and I on the call, it's one simple question. And it's, how do you want to be remembered? And when you think about the characteristics or the values that rise up like the cream to the top right away, those are the values that you want to make sure are infused into everything you do, every encounter you have. Now, obviously, we're human, and this is not rainbows and unicorns. I don't live my life that way, but it's an attempt, at least, to make sure that those values are ingrained in who we are. As I like to say, it's kind of like your eye color. You know, people just know who you are, just like your eye color, just by being in your presence. So what can we do to make sure that we stay in alignment? And the examples of people that are just out of alignment, well, we see these people all around us all the time. Is people are miserable, they're not kind, they're impatient, you know, all those adjectives that are counter to the ones I just described. And I also talk in the book a little bit about ego, which maybe we'll get into, which maybe we'll realize is more the ego than them themselves. But it's about understanding what values rise up to the top when you ask yourself that really simple question: how do I want to be remembered?
You say it's a really simple question. It's in my mind, it's quite a complex question, right? Is to do the work to be able to answer that question properly is bordering on impossible, because what we end up doing is deciding that how we want to be remembered is perhaps even an unrealistic expectation of ourselves, or we add too many ingredients into that bowl and create an impossibility as a result of which. And I was thinking about that question when I read it in the book, and knowing that I got the privilege to speak to you today on behalf of everybody else, and wondered if there was a slight pivot or a slight tailor on that question that could be fun for a business owner to consider right now, and ask yourself first, is how do you want to be remembered as a leader of your people?
Yeah, 100%.
What do you want them to say about you to their friends and family members? What do you want them to be saying about the life that you've helped them create through your leadership? What's your take on thinking about that pivot on the question that way around?
Yeah, I mean, that's largely what I speak about in corporate settings, is the legacy of our leadership. And leadership is not just the leadership of others, it's also the leadership of ourselves. How are we showing up in a powerfully impactful way in our work every single day? And if it's leadership of ourselves, then we have to understand the impact may not be subordinates, it may not be employees, but it will be clients or customers that we can impact. And so thinking about your self-leadership or leadership of others under the same context, the same thing, when you think back to the end, or sorry, you fast forward to the end, and then you look back at what we're talking about now, you just need to ask yourself, when this is all over, when this career is done, what are the top 3 adjectives that I would like to have come out of people's mouths who either knew me and knew my passion in my work, or who reported to me, or my peers? What are the 3 things, just the top 3 things? This isn't about, and I think that, you know, when I say it's a simple question, it really is in context a simple question, but the truth of it is, you're right, monumental undertaking. And so it's not about coming up with a list of 12 or 14 or 15 adjectives and trying to shove those into every day. It's being aware on a very high level what those 2 or 3 things are, and then just trying to put them on repeat. And then eventually those 3 become mastered and you can move on to other ones. But yeah, it's just about tiny shifts to come into alignment.
Okay. So if I'm trying to think about this as an entrepreneur right now and say, how do I use this? What do I do with it? And let's take that 3 adjectives that would describe how we'd want to be remembered by people. I'm now thinking about user groups, right? I'm thinking about the team of people that I lead. I'm thinking about my wife and my children. I'm thinking about my parents and my immediate siblings, etc. I'm speaking about my extended friend groups. I'm thinking about my peer group. And I'm thinking that I could probably create a list of 3 adjectives towards each one of those. Would that be an exercise worth doing in your mind, or is that too much?
Yeah, well, I think baby steps, Phil. I think pick the group maybe that's most important to you at first. So maybe it's your wife and your children to start. And, a really great story comes up about this, and I think it might answer your question and maybe where some of the participants today, where their heads are at with this question, is my sister. She just had a baby not that long ago. And I remember seeing her. She lives about 4 hours away from us. So, I saw her around the 3-month mark. And of course, she's this glowing pregnant woman. Yeah. She's happy. Then I saw her at the 6-month mark, still glowing, bigger, but glowing. Then I saw her around the 8.5-month mark. She was what she described as bigger than a house. She was miserable. And I remember saying, "How are you feeling?" And it was this demonic look that she turned. She was like, "Get him out of me." And I said, what a transition. What are you so excited about? It's almost time. Like, you're about to have this baby boy. Are you so excited? It's our first child. And she said, yeah. And I said, when you think about your legacy, what do you want to be remembered for? These are really important questions, introspective questions. Now you're bringing a little human into the world. And she said, I want to be remembered for being a good mother. And I said, whoa, stop right there. I said, what does that mean? What does being a good mother mean? What are the ingredients, if you will, that go into baking that cake? And she thought about it a moment. She said, well, thoughtfulness and compassion and unrelenting love and, the ability to have the deepest empathy I've ever had. And I was like, oh, okay. So you mean the same things that make you an incredible sister and an incredible daughter and an incredible nurse. And so it's okay to think about all the different pockets, because the truth is that you're going to serve, your peers and your coworkers differently than maybe your own family. But what I submit is that a lot of the things that are really true to who you are, your essence, those values, your everyday legacy, actually touch a lot of different people in a lot of different areas of your life. And what you realize is legacy isn't about a title. It's about values and virtues and characteristics and really how you show up in the world.
A lot of our Inner Circle members, a lot of people listening in right now have just gone through a period of business leadership that has been immensely stressful. We're still in it in most senses of circumstances. And the results of which could mean that there is feelings of perhaps being out of alignment with what, to coin your phrase, of like unicorns and fairy tale versions of what we would like our life to be. What do you do if you're in that position right now and you're feeling like, okay, how do I want to be remembered? What adjectives might my people say about me right now? And then you think about it honestly, you listen to the adjectives back in your own mind and you're like, yuck, that is horrible thought processes. I feel like I'm not where I want to be on this. What do you say to that?
Well, first of all, you have to give yourself permission. The world that we're in right now is not the world we were in 3 months ago or 3 months before that, and certainly not 8 months ago. Things are really different, and we have to at least give ourselves permission to fail and to fall and to learn and to gather lessons. And one of those things is, maybe not always having patience. So patience is one of my everyday legacy values. I really want to be known and remembered as being somebody who's just patient, and with that comes kindness. But I can tell you that over the last 6 months, there have been times where my patience has worn maybe a little thinner than I would like to admit. So the first piece is forgiveness. And the second piece is this awareness of realizing that in order to be of service, we have to fill our own cup. I call this philosophy being self-full. And, most of us are raised to be selfless. We're taught that if we are selfish, it's a bad thing. And so I just recoined it, being self-full. And the idea is that you need to fill your own cup first, and what overflows is for everyone else. It's not, this half cup and you can serve from there. That's just not how it works. We have to find ways that we can keep ourselves in alignment, is what I like to say. And part of the way that we do that is by focusing on ourselves, things that fill us up. It could be meditation, running, walking the dog, playing with our children, reading. It could be whatever it is, but it's really important to carve out that time that'll help keep us in alignment.
And how do you do that when there's so much else going on, right? You're trying to learn new technologies. You're being stretched around by the fact that you've got perhaps the responsibilities of taking care of your children in a different way because the education system has moved in a different direction, because of the fact that you're now needing to deal with rescheduling clinics, take care of hygiene standards, make sure that what you're doing is being compliant amongst the rules, dealing with the insecurities, uncertainties, etc. of the people that you lead. How do you find that time? Because again, I agree with the principle in its entirety, but surely there's just too much to do sometimes.
Yeah, well, I like to describe myself as a spiritual pragmatist. So I'm a little bit about the woo and a lot about the do. So again, I like to think of the fact that everything that I've written about, that I talk about, has to be practical. And so I empathize with the fact that lots of people are saying, this is great, be self-full, but when do I have time to do that? And what I submit is it's not so much about the time. It's not about carving out an hour. It's not even about carving out 30 minutes if you don't have that time. It's about carving out even a minute of reflection or 5 minutes of reflection. It's not so much about the time. It's about the act, and whatever the act is gives you, how it fills you up, how it makes you feel. So I recognize that, most of us don't have time in our days. Some of us would long for a 26th hour lately, even though at the same time we would begrudge having it. But if that hour was time for us, we'd probably take it. And so it's just about carving out any amount of time and trying to be forgiving with yourself in trying to execute this balance between reality and really knowing that in order to serve others, we have to be of service to ourselves. We have to fill our own cups.
Got it.
That makes sense?
Got it. Yeah, it does. And there's a process, Cody, that I champion a lot based on the fact that so much of what we find ourselves looking at is all the stuff we haven't yet done. The giant to-do list that is ahead of us, the fact that I've got to get through it, the feeling of inadequacy because of the fact that the mountain still seems like there's so much in order to be able to climb. A process that I adopt myself, encourage of others, is what I call a done it list as opposed to a to-do list. And I think it'd be a great exercise even to be able to do in the next week or so is to take this chapter of navigating this difficult period that we've all been going through and write your own done it list. Write out a list of all the things that you've successfully managed to be able to do through this period of time to remind yourself that you're a proven success story as opposed to somebody who hasn't been able to adapt or change or evolve through this period of time. Is actually concrete that list. And the moment of reflection that sometimes comes through that can empower you to be able to just feel better about yourself and look introspectively and achieve some more. And I think that might be an easier action take. I read the book and I'm like, 5 days at Ashtanga, that sounds like joy, right? A chance to be able to just get away from everything and clean my mind over a 5-day period of time. And I think I can schedule it for 2046. I think is when I can say, hey, honey, I'm going away for that. And don't worry, you got it with the kids. And like, it just doesn't feel realistic. But this permission you're giving us just to take micro moments, I think is something that if we're all honest with ourselves, we probably can hit that pause button a little more freely. And then also communicate your need to do those things to other people too. So what would your take be that if you've got to communicate with your spouse, you got to communicate with your team, you got to communicate with your front desk, you got to communicate with your friends, that you need to find these pockets of time so you can hit pause, so that you can remind yourself that you're living your everyday legacy? How would you advise people to broker some of those conversations?
Well, I think it's about having an honest conversation. And I think one of the things that COVID has allowed is a lot more humanity in our work. Now, it may not always feel like that. It may feel like, a lot of people are disgruntled about having to wear masks and there's always something to complain. Like there's all kinds of noise, but when you break through it, I think one of the key ingredients right now is still this humanity. And so, for instance, having conversations with your team about checking in on how they're feeling, how they're doing. Mm-hmm. Do they feel like they're being of service optimally, or do they feel like they're just scratching the surface? I mean, as a leader, if I heard or saw that a team member was just barely scratching the surface in order to be of service to our clientele, that would concern me. I would want to find the time, even if it's 5 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe even a day, just to rest and recharge. And I know that these are luxuries, and certainly 5 days at an ashram is a luxury. But the challenge, and you've read the book, Phil, you understand, is that I had spent 27 years, and in particular in my adult life, from the time I graduated university until 27, where I didn't let up off the pedal. I just went 900 miles an hour in every lane possible. And so the ashram in 5 days wasn't, it wasn't a vacation. It wasn't, I need to, go and put my feet up and drink Mai Tais on the beach. It was a reckoning. It was me saying, if I don't stop, I could be checking out here entirely from the world. Right. And so the way that I have learned to manage that, to not hit those break points anymore, is to do 30 minutes here and an hour there, and maybe the odd day. And of course, taking vacation when and where possible. But it's also about managing our perspective and understanding that a win 6 months ago looks very different today. The success equation that we had yesterday doesn't necessarily mean the same success equation today. So as people are building this list, this done it list, and I love that philosophy, is consider a win is going to be different. So if normally you read 10 books in a month, and I may be stretching, consider a win if you've finished half of one book right now. Because so many of our worlds have changed. Like you said,
resetting of parameters and rewriting the playbook based on the new environment.
100%. We've had so many people go from mom to mom and educator, from mom and professional and educator to chief disinfector. There's all these different hats that we're wearing now. And so we just have to give ourselves permission that maybe what worked 6 months ago doesn't work today, but by virtue of that same philosophy, that the success we had 6 months ago can't be defined the same way today. And maybe someday it'll be back to that and we'll feel normal again. But right now we just have to give ourselves permission for this reality we're in.
Everybody on this call right now listening in has a desire to succeed, has a desire to be more successful than where they are right now. And this whole idea of trying to define what success is, I think is remarkably difficult. You talked about how your goal when starting in your professional career was to be more affluent than the other local funeral director, right? That was what it all came down to, is my measure of success is based on my ability to beat somebody else in a race. This comparison piece is used on us all the time, right? Is you can be more, you have to achieve more is always possible. Come on, you can do better than that. What are you messing about? Just one more push-up. Like whatever it might need to be, there's this desire to go with more and more and more and more and more. The question that I've been playing with in my own mind a lot with recently, just as an entrepreneur, and I'd encourage others to be able to explore the same question themselves, is how much is enough? Mm-hmm. Is trying to define the answer to that question, again, is remarkably difficult. But if you can just even dig into that how much is enough piece, you can find a level of contentment at a level that means that you can enjoy some of what it is you've achieved, as opposed to always being on the gas for more. Yeah. What advice do you have from a comparison point of view? Because so many clinics get mapped against each other. There's so much of looking at best practice from elsewhere. There's so much of, well, if you only do this, this, and this, then everything's going to get easier. What do you do to silence that voice of comparison and never feeling like you're doing enough?
Yeah, well, I mean, that voice is none other than the voice of our egos. And, when we get into this comparison syndrome, we end up with the imposter playing a large role in our lives, where we're judging our performance based on other people. And most of us have very unique circumstances, from our family dynamics to our professional settings, to our work, to our clients, to, there's a whole gamut of considerations. And so we know logically, when we stand back, when we look at things objectively, that the truth is we can say that, yeah, it's all different. We can't measure ourselves the same. But then when you get into it and you get caught up in all of the external factors like social media or, trade magazines that come out, and you start to think, gosh, why is everyone else doing so well? And I don't seem to be keeping up. I don't seem to be managing this very well. We have to understand that our metric of measurement has to also change. So if before you were able to measure by the foot, well, now maybe you're considering measuring by the inch. What is it that I've done that is successful? And does it work for me? Does it work for my clientele? does it sustain my passion in this business? Am I happy? And
Right.
if you can check most of those boxes, I would say you're doing incredibly well. And, the other things, while they are there, and yes, they're a distraction, and yes, they stoke our egos and the voice of our egos inside of us to push that imposter syndrome agenda forward. The truth is, if we really just focus, we can usually shut those out and we can usually turn them off. The challenge is we just have to get back enough. We have to get an objective view on the realities we find ourselves in right now.
Right. And trying to be practical with some of those things is changing a success metric to the fact that you've managed to sustain the employment of your entire teams over a period of time. Changing your success metrics to the fact that we've managed to collect another 10, 30, 50 high impact testimonials from our existing clients. Changing the success metrics to the fact that you've put work, effort, and energy in that future proofs your brand through the fact that you've done the work to be able to tell your story better, etc. These are all things that you can feel proud of. These are things that you've laid seeds in the ground for, things that you should be able to give yourself some recognition and reward for, as opposed to let's chase the dollar. That way around, I think is important. Codi, I'm going to bounce you in another direction. I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to make you go to work. Explain to me your experience of either running a hearing care clinic or any awareness towards anybody that you care about being involved in helping somebody with a set of hearing aids. Any knowledge or insight into that industry whatsoever?
I did not realize that was a prerequisite for our call today.
Definitely wasn't. I just want to know where you're coming from.
Yeah, no, none. No experience.
So here we're going to play a game. You know nothing about this. So we've got dozens of people on this call who have dedicated their professional careers to helping people with hearing difficulty. What I think is super fun in the fact that I have you on this call right now is tell me, without me having any prejudgment towards this, what do you think about the world of hearing aids, hearing care? Who are they for? How much are they? What problems would they solve? So hit me from your uneducated opinion, what your perception is of the work of a hearing care clinic.
Yeah, well, my layperson perception would relate probably to my death care experience, in that I would assume the broader part of the clientele is a more mature clientele, in that 50-ish plus, maybe 55 plus crowd. That would be a layperson assessment. I would hope that similarly to the death care space, that compassion and patience and empathy are key and integral characteristics that that people in this space would have to employ on a pretty regular basis. Cost, you said? Oh gosh. Well, I would suspect that, like most things, that it's become hyper competitive, and that's driving prices down, which is the worst damn thing to compete on. And yet most of us are forced into that world. So I'm assuming there's that at play. And that is perhaps the barriers to entry with, things like being able to have access to basically a global infrastructure now of devices, hearing assistive devices, that's also enabling just about anyone, once they have their education, to open up shop.
Right.
I don't know. Those would be my stabs in the dark.
Well, you got some good stuff, and I thought it was interesting just to get somebody's outside of the industry straight up first perspective. Now, you touched on so many things about the importance of empathy, the importance of genuine understanding, the importance of really making a difference, caring about people, all those things that you would know to be true. Yet the majority of people, when you're asked about a perception of what the hearing care industry is it's for old people. They don't work that well. They're too expensive. The people that are dispensing them are pushy used car salespeople type people, and it's all a bit of a scam, right? That is sometimes what the external legacy feeling is around the world of hearing care. What I've learned to be true is that the reality is more like what you explained, is people who really give a damn. They do want to make a difference. They want to ride with people over a period of time. They want to help their patients live their everyday legacy. In fact, that's what they make their judgment criteria towards, is to say, we know there's thousands of people out there in the world right now that are missing out in living their best life because they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what they're not hearing. They're not aware of the fact that there are solutions towards these things. So what I would like you to be able to think about with me is if you were running a hearing care clinic and you wanted part of your everyday legacy to change the community's vibe and thinking around what it means to professionally take care of somebody's hearing, how might you go about it? Because you've done a lot of work to be able to change the local community reputation in an industry like funeral care, which equally could have a bad rap, right? What would your steps be to a business owner that says, I want to change the way that people think about us. I want to leave more of an everyday legacy about the integrity of our profession?
Yeah, immediately what leapt at me partway through what you were saying was storytelling. We've been telling stories for as long as there have been humans. It may not have always been verbal, but storytelling is ingrained in who we are, and people identify with stories. And when you said that the people who are on this call and other progressive people in the industry are really focused on helping people to not miss out on those moments in life that are so critical and so important, stories are something everybody has, no matter their walk in life, their socioeconomic status, their sex, gender, sexual orientation. It doesn't matter. Everybody has stories that they can always turn to, stories that are almost a part of who they are. And so, if I were running a clinic, I would want to be tapping into those stories of the customers in almost a before and after kind of approach to understand the difference it really made in poignant moments, in those story moments where stories are born, because those are things that I think most humans can't deny. And stories, my whole book is just stories. And,
right.
One of the things it isn't is prescriptive. And I wrote it that way on purpose. Now, so far, I've ticked one person off who said it wasn't prescriptive enough. And okay, too bad. There's lots of textbooks to go read. But the reason people resonate with the book is because it's filled with stories. And so if I were in that space, and I've had similar success, by the way, in the death care space, is helping understand stories, because you want to talk about used car salesmen and, used car salespeople and this taking advantage of people and being too expensive. You could basically take out hearing care and put in funeral. They're really synonymous. And storytelling has been one of the key aspects to helping people understand the real value of funeralization and of ceremony, and understanding why we come together when we have a loss, why we celebrate a life, how we start that journey of grief recovery, and how we keep the memories of those people alive in our hearts and minds forever. And so all of those things that I described are completely replicatable in the hearing world. But There has to be a desire to do it. There has to be a purpose behind it. And it has to be a genuine purpose. And it has to be to advance the common thread of the folks who are listening here, which is the profession as a whole. I'm a big believer that high tides raise all boats. And so while we are in this in an insular way as our own business and our own community, when we look up, really, it is much broader than we think. And so I always believe in two things. One, storytelling, and the second is community, which is understanding how when we come together, we can really, really advance things positively for not only ourselves, but for our communities.
So this would be about how do you collect and share the stories of the impact that you either had in the world or the impact that you'd like to see more of in the world. That collect and share thing is huge.
Huge.
And if you want to enhance the reputation that is laid down by the legacy impact that you're having on it every day, then the takeaway might be to ask yourself, what am I actually doing to collect and share the stories of the brilliance that we create? And you might end up having to be honest with yourself about the fact that you're not doing enough. That might be the output on this, is that you have desire to be able to create more impact and more purpose about how you show up in this profession, but your actions might not be serving the outcome that you're looking to try and go and see. And I think this collect and share principle towards storytelling is huge. Yeah. And it would really echo anything I would think there, Cody, too.
Well, and I think too, Phil, when we think about someone like, let's take a McDonald's employee, for instance, and this is no commentary on the individuals, but when you think about when we've gone to McDonald's in the past, and I think most of us have probably gone there once or twice, and you walk up to the counter and there's an employee on the other side of the counter and they say, "Welcome to McDonald's. What can I get you?" And you You provide whatever it is you'd like, and they hit some buttons and they say the amount, you tender that amount of money, and you stand to the side and wait for your order. Those people largely are what I would refer to as order takers.
Yep.
So I think part of it is evaluating when a customer comes in, how are you engaging with them in a meaningful way? Because the way you engage with them out of the onset is how you'll probably engage with them for the entire duration of that relationship. And so you can't expect to turn the tides at the end. It starts in the very beginning. How are we engaging with people? Are we just processing orders? Because people then see these hearing aids as a very logistical solution to their hearing problem. And again, This is me making assumptions. As opposed to having this really good relationship, understanding through conversation, adding maybe 20 minutes or 30 minutes of conversation to this sales engagement with these people, and understanding what their real needs are, helping to overcome those, understanding their experience when you've done that. That is storytelling. That is helping them from the start to the finish. So when the ask is at the end, hey, I wonder if you'd be willing to do this, or if we could ask you some questions, or if we could solicit your feedback, it doesn't feel like it's out of the blue, and it feels congruent with the entire process that you've had. And that's certainly something that happened in the death care industry and continues to happen all the time, is this building of relationships, understanding that the foundation of business really is relationships.
And what's unique about the hearing care profession, unlike most others, is the transaction is delivered up front, and then the ongoing care is provided as a part of that transaction, in some sets of circumstances for as long as forever. So the question that I'd be asking of everybody listening in right now is what are you planning into your steps in the post-fitting side of things to understand the true impact of your work, to collect and share those stories as they go, is to be able to then turn more of those stories into portable stories? What are you doing to share the success stories of others so that they can take them and borrow them and feed them back out into the world? And you can probably just systemize some steps as you go through your follow-up process, as much as I hate the word follow-up, that would mean that you can with more authority collect some of these magic moments that I knew you also so much create. Codi, I'm going to take you in another direction. You said that one of the most important conversations you have is the one you have with yourself. And my experience of self-based conversations is it can be very hard to not be very mean to yourself. It can be very hard to train that voice to be of service to you as opposed to of sabotage to you. Mm-hmm. How do you go about having more effective conversations with yourself?
Well, if I'm going to be just blatantly honest, it's difficult in the beginning. It's not easy. It's not fun. It's not something that you just think, I'm going to go easy on myself. It's that voice of the ego that's just sort of omnipresent. It's just always lurking. It's just always there to sabotage you, your inner saboteur. And it's something that says, why would you think like that? That's the dumbest way to think in the world. Or you think you can pull that off? Or, things like what gives you the authority to think that way or that abstractly? Mm-hmm. Look at everyone else in your inner circle or in your profession. What are they doing? What makes you think you can stand on that pulpit or to have such bravado about the work you're doing? And it really takes a concerted effort to turn to that voice and just say, shut the hell up. And that, again, sounds, I understand, a bit, unicorns and rainbows, a bit mystical. But the truth is, you have to just catch that voice and then shut it down. It's literally, for me, it almost worked as a visualization, because that voice for me, that was more than a voice. It was like a second personality that was always attached to me. It was very present in my life. And it got to the point that its voice actually became louder. And as I like to say, when you can learn to shut it down, when you can learn to replace those conversations with conversations that are more positive, that are more freeing, the resonance of your purpose starts to drown it out. It really does start to get louder, And it just takes work, and it's messy work. It's not fun, and it's not easy. But just doing it, much like the idea of like carving out time to be selfful, just doing it a little bit at a time. Doesn't mean you'll do it perfectly. It doesn't mean it won't rear its ugly head repeatedly, and try again. It's just about trying slowly but surely to overcome it.
Running a business can also result in you very easily finding yourself like running your busyness, right? It can take over you. And before long, you can lose sight of your purpose. So you talk about the fact that self-talk can be amplified by having a greater clarity of your purpose. If somebody's sat listening to this right now thinking, I'm so much in this work right now, and maybe their business has grown, it's changed, it's evolved, and they're feeling a little off kilter of what it was supposed to be when they first started, or what the vision of the business was when they first started. What would you say to try get that back on track?
Yeah, I mean, I even as an entrepreneur, and I'm sure you have, Phil, you've experienced the same thing. You're working on the business for so long, and then things start to take off and things are good, or you get busy and you end up working in the business. And it seems like an inescapable place to be, to get back to the strategy, the mindset, the purpose of what you do. And much like carving out time to be selfful, we have to find time to focus on these things. Because as I like to say, one of the things that happens if we don't do this, if we can't figure out a way to get onto our business again and out of it, is that the market will start to manage us as opposed to us managing the market. And that is it's a bad place to be, and it becomes a very slippery slope, because eventually that voice, that ego voice, gets a little louder. Your clarity around your message and your purpose gets really, really muddied. And it gets harder to not only get away from those things, but then get out of the business and back onto it. So it is about carving out time. It's about tapping into resources, even outside of yourself, even outside of your profession. I'm sure that this inner circle, I'm not, familiar with all the inner workings of the inner circle, but I'm happy to be in it today. But I'm sure that this is a community that lives on beyond 90 minutes, like this. And so you have this inner circle, this community, if you will. Community is incredibly important. So consider, as Jim Rohn would say, the 5 people you spend the most time with, and evaluate in your professional setting, who are the 5 people you turn to most? And do they uplift you? Do they, do they make you feel alive in the work you do? Are they progressive? Do they challenge you? Do they provide you with a framework of reference that constantly wants you to up-level and excel? Because when you do that, that is an ingredient. That's a tool to help you to make sure that you are focused on your business and not just buried in it.
Yeah, I really like that. And as a serial entrepreneur, somebody who's launched, founded, done so many different things with businesses and product launches and the like, this being stuck right in it is always a thing. And 2 things that were taught to me from a young age with one of my early mentors is one was that your business is your vehicle to help you do all the things that you want to do with your life, and understand that your business is a tool to help you do those things. So if you don't have clarity on what the things that you want to do because of your business, then you end up getting stuck within the metrics of the business itself. But if you can have clarity of what you're using your business to help you enable outside of it, you can act with more purpose in your actions in between.
Makes perfect sense.
Perhaps one of the most powerful quotes that stands firm in my line of quotes is from a guy called Paul J. Meyer. And Paul J. Meyer defined success. He defines success as the progressive realization of predetermined, worthwhile, and achievable goals. And I know we all know goal setting is important, but if you take those words precisely and listen to the success is the progressive realization of predetermined, worthwhile, and achievable goals. There's so much in there that you have to define. But I would ask you right now, while you've been working through this busyness period, is do you have some things that you want to achieve for you and only you or your family between now and the end of the year? Do you have some things that you want to achieve next year that you can use your business to help enable happen, that are things that are completely outside of your business world, but your business can be the enabler for those things to be made into reality? That's what I'd be
100%.
driving from a prescriptive point of view right now. And your purpose can be found within that. Here's the destination that I want to be able to make real. Like it's, will this help me or hinder me being able to achieve blank? And I think that's a fun way of being able to try and help set your direction and not let the industry set it for you.
Yeah, I love it.
We got people listening in here live. We haven't spoken to them so much so far. I want every single one of you that's listening to do one of two things. I'd love you to either put a question into the Q&A that we can then field with Codi here. And if you don't have a question, what I do want to get from you right now is, what is one thing that you've taken from our discussion so far? What is one thing that you might do differently? What is one thing that's been sparked? And I want to see what we get here in the chat. And what we got here is Clive asks, he says, you made the transition from running for over 20 years at 100 mile an hour. You realize this was not the right thing to do. But having done that for so long, it can be difficult to change. What was the process you adopted to transitioning towards taking a step back, taking stock and recognizing what is right for us as people and our business, so we have the time to enjoy the journey better, become a better leader and a better business owner? Is it a ruthless process or stepping stones?
Well, I mean, Clive and others are probably going to be surprised by this answer. Now, that is, unless they've read the book, then they may know what I'm about to say. And let me give some context after I say it, but I'll just say it for the shock value. Be lazy. And that sounds probably peculiar as all get out. But, you know, I did spend 20 years going very quickly in all lanes. And one of the challenges is when I decided to leave that corporate world and pursue my own entrepreneurial venture, you know, I had a wonderful 6-figure salary and a company car and insurance and gas and perks and you name it, I kind of had it. I like to say the shiniest pair of golden handcuffs there were out there. And I politely unclicked them and handed them back to what was my mentor for 15 of those years. And of course, the next day I wake up and I am virtually, for sake of argument, unemployed. I have no car. I have no salary. I have no perks. And the cell phone that I have just acquired personally, because I'd carried a corporate phone, of course, is not ringing. I'm not getting text messages. I'm not getting emails. It was just such a diabolically different world. And at first, I felt super lazy. Now, up until that point, I had been the antithesis of lazy. I had gone, like I said, and managed relatively well. You know, now I look back and think I wasn't managing at all well. But at the time, I thought, heck, I'm managing this real well, running 900 miles an hour in all these different areas. And so this idea around being lazy actually procured some incredible results, because I found when I took the time to be quiet and mindful, which are other words you can use instead of lazy if it's more comfortable for you. If you want to stay uncomfortable, stay with lazy with me. And what I started to realize was what I was really passionate about, the why of the work I wanted to do. And as I started to work with clients, the ideal client that filled me up as much as I was filled up by serving them. And so this idea around lazy became this sort of humorous anecdote that I was, you know, I'd had a lazy day or I'd had a lazy awakening. And so, you know, I would say that the idea of looking at it as lazy is probably a ruthless process. But the truth is, you know, Clive, it is about stepping stones. It's about tiny steps. I mean, so often in our lives, if we think about the times when we've tried to make change and we've tried to bite off too much, we have often failed. And you know, once burned, twice shy, that approach to change, I think, is a lot of the reason why we are so change averse in our businesses and as a society, because most of us have not approached change very well. And so inevitably we end up having to deconstruct what we did to try and evoke the change and then rebuild it. And most of us just check out. And so it's about tiny changes. It's about seemingly inconsequential things that actually can make the biggest difference, and dialing into that why, the purpose, having conversations in a non-rainbows and unicorns kind of way, just real conversations like, why do I do what I do? How can I be of service that fills me up as much as it fills up those who I serve? Those are really powerful guiding force questions, not only for you if you're a leader, but for your teams and the culture of your organization. It actually gives people something to galvanize to. And so it is possible, but it definitely is a process. And at times it can feel ruthless, especially when that voice that we talked about earlier doesn't let up or isn't kind.
Let's just build on that question with Ollie's question here as well, that says, every time I'm lazy, I find myself guilt-ridden for not being at it. How do you initially deal with this as a high performer?
Ollie, miserably. Just being honest, miserably. I actually found probably for about the first maybe month or even longer, I felt completely miserable. Because here I had set all these benchmarks, I measured things, I was able to quantify metrics and success and ask myself in my corporate environment, if I hadn't done something, what could I do better? And best, I led a team of 800 people across the country. And so I always had a community to tap into. And here I was in this isolated little silo of self-entrepreneurship, of solopreneurship at the time. And it was pretty miserable, because the truth is, you don't want to burden your family, your significant others, your children, your friends with constant talk about trying to crawl out of the hole that you feel like you've dug yourself, even though the truth is we chose to be where we are. I chose to do that. And so I wanted it to be very positive and seem really, have it be very well received. And so it took some time, but it did get easier. When I started to be able to shift my perspective around those aha moments that I had around the clients I wanted to work with, these brilliant ideas of creativity came. And I think part of it was, as a high performer, our minds don't shut down very often. They're constantly going. Some of you probably experience that pretty regularly. And so when I was actually able to shut my mind off and not worry about what plane I had to catch or how many meetings I had that day or how many emails I had to follow up on, when I was just able to compartmentalize space a little bit more and have control over it than I had ever had before, I actually started to have some pretty creative ideas. And I think it's Steven Shapiro, who's a great speaker. Yeah. And Steven talks about the fact that stress kills creativity. And so inevitably, the more we have this idea around stress killing our creativity, well, creativity is the single biggest ingredient to innovation. And so, of course, when I think back now and I look at it objectively, I was probably the least creative executive out there because I was constantly inundated by stress. So my creativity just wasn't able to flourish. Minimize the stress, open up my mind, get an expansiveness, creativity started to flow. And all of a sudden, my business, which I thought would be one thing, started to diversify and turn into more things and then replicate and eventually grew to a team. And so possibility became abound once I got past the miserable piece of it all. Yeah.
I'm relating that laziness piece is almost fuel. Right? You know that if you don't drink enough water, you're going to get headaches, you're going to feel lethargic. You know if you eat a terrible diet, you're going to, again, have more lethargy that shows up into your life.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying here is if we don't find these moments to pause, these moments to step back, these moments to reflect and review properly, then what happens is we're running on empty. And that isn't of service to anybody, least of all your creativity. Yeah. And I think if you can reprogram that a touch in your own mind that says, I'm not being lazy, I'm filling my cup, I'm filling the tank, I'm giving myself what I need to be able to lead the next chapter, then that reframe can be useful too. I'm going to come to Julie's question in a second, and I know that some of you are obviously really thinking hard about how you put your killer question together. I promise you can ask more than one. You don't have to overthink it to the point of making the question perfect. And what I am going to assume is that if you're not putting a comment in on the chat, or that you haven't got a question for Codi, it means you're not listening. And if you're not listening, then why did you show up in the first place? So I would invite you all to be able to just give us some contribution to show to us that you're there, and to show to Codi that from his point of view that you value his contributions to come and to spend some time with us. But Codi, my question for you is as trivial, a silly one, is what's the deal with your background? What's the deal with the blue? And, yeah. There must be something to it. There must be some reason behind it.
I mean, it's a piece of art. My partner and I used to live in downtown Toronto. We had a big condo with lots of wall space, and then we hit a magic age and we thought, you know what, I think I'd like to maybe slow down my life a little bit and maybe hit suburbia, which we did. And we found ourselves with far less wall space. So when I converted this space into a studio, like you have for virtual presentations, I wanted something behind there more than just the wood wall. And I thought, oh, that piece of art that I really love. And so this is where it came home. It's an oil piece by an artist from Las Vegas, actually. And I bought it while I was there on a trip and had it shipped home, and it arrived in great shape. And it's one of my favorite pieces.
Thank you for sharing the story on it. And a micro lesson in that even is what are you adding to your own space from a work environmental point of view that is things that bring you joy or things that allow you to relive a memory that was valuable to you, or things that encourage somebody to ask a question of you that allows you to share a story that in turn is helping build your everyday legacy, right? I think this is just an example of you practicing what it is that you preach and making that come to life. So I'm pleased that there was a story with it.
I usually get more questions about this than I do about the background. Why is there a skull in your...
Well, now you have to tell us. Now you have to tell us.
Well, I mean, the easy answer is that the Stoics used to say memento mori, which is Latin for remember your death. And they used it in the context to understand that when we can think about our death, it actually enables us more powerfully to live, to understand that while we're here is when we make our impact. And interestingly enough, I had not been introduced to Stoicism until I wrote my book, put it out into the world, and someone who is a devout Stoic, if you will, philosopher, sent me a note and said, you're more Stoic than you may know. And I wrote back and said, what is a Stoic?
What does that mean?
And the funny thing was I'd had that skull for years, and I just liked it because, death care, funeral service. So yeah, there's stories around us, all around us.
Let's see what else we got question-wise. And I think this is one we can probably jam out together, Cody, is the question from Julie that she says, sharing stories equals building authenticity. Absolutely. Should we add more time to our initial hearing evaluation to give more time for relationship building, authenticity, and storytelling? And typical scenario in this environment is many people could be spending anywhere between 30 minutes and 90 minutes in an initial hearing aid, hearing evaluation. So, your view, do you think people should be spending more time in that?
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned earlier that there's a transactional piece, and I'm assuming, is this that time when this is relatively transactional?
Yeah, this is diagnostics of current scenarios. This is a full-on hearing test with an audiometer. It's understanding some lifestyle questions. It's understanding the circumstances that they're having difficulties in, and then moving to some recommendations.
Yeah. When you said that earlier, the first thing that popped into my mind was find a way to make that transactional process feel less transactional. It's very similar to, and I'll just give a quick funeral service analogy that people can at least appreciate from a logistical perspective. One of the things that's required by funeral directors in the arrangement process is to collect vital statistical information, which is basically name of the deceased, middle name, last name, where they were born, who their parents were, what their last names were, where they were born, age, date of death, all these very closed-ended questions, just these one-off questions that could be answered really easily, frankly. And the challenge is that, at least in my experience and my evaluation, is the more that funeral directors put that at the start of the arrangement process, the more it challenged them to open up those families to more exploratory conversations after. I mean, you just spent asking them 31 closed-ended questions, and now you expect them to open up and share what the person meant to them and all these heartwarming stories and memories. So what we did was we took that process and put it at the very end. And what we found is that most funeral directors who really invested in the process could usually answer a lot of those questions because it had come out, the answers had come out in the stories. And so anything you can do to make that less transactional and increase the story time where we push devices away and we just understand who it is in front of us, that we don't treat the person as transactional, I think that would be critical. I had a funeral director once. I was keynoting in Las Vegas again, and it was 2,000 people, and this question and answer at the end. And this gentleman stood up, and basically I had submitted that they add about 20 minutes to their arrangement process, this exploratory time to actually get to know who was in front of them. And he stood up at the very end and he said, with all due respect, young man, he was in his 60s, and I think at the time I was probably in my late 20s. He said, I run a very large business. I cannot afford to have my funeral director spend 20 more minutes with every family. And I said, with all due respect, I don't believe you can afford not to. You know, so much for our business, the value people derive comes from the relationships they have with you, especially as business broadens and disruption happens and we have more people doing the same of what we do. We are the piece of the puzzle that is very unique. You know, when I used to have price shoppers and funeral service, I don't know if the hearing world deals with this, but funeral service deals with price shoppers all the time. You know, and so we would get these price shoppers on the phone, and we'd spend time with them and try and understand their needs and marry our services to their needs in a really eloquent way, at the same time trying to create a relationship. And at the end of the call, I can't count the number of times that people would say to me, so what's the difference between Shewan Funeral Home, there you guys, and Jones Funeral Home up the street? And I had a line that worked most all the time. And I said, the difference is me. I don't work at Jones Funeral Home. I work right here at Shewan Funeral Home. And we're about creating relationships with the people that we're privileged to serve. And I would only hope that after this conversation and any other questions I can answer, you would enable us with the privilege to do so. And that really got to the core difference between us and them, whoever them is that we are innately our entire business. Our people, our front lines are our business. Hearing aids, widgets, caskets, I don't care what you're selling. The truth is, you are the innate difference between you and them. And so, long answer to a relatively short question, should we be spending more time, Julie? I would say, without knowing your profession, inarguably, yes.
And I would echo that. And knowing Julie and knowing her practice, I know that you do spend a lot of time there. I know that this relationship part is something that is very, very important. And I think what we want to get to as a point is to say how much is enough time there is two things that you want to find out. One is their current situation. And two is their motivation as to why they want this to be a certain way different in the future. And that doesn't mean tell me your current situation and what is your motivation for wanting to fix your hearing loss. That means doing that dance the long way around of learning about their current situation, learning about the difficulties they're having. See, most people that walk into your clinics do not need a hearing test to know they have a hearing loss. They knew that before they got there. That's why they were in the room. What they need to understand is why now and why you. And I think your ability to be able to help them understand the why now thing in the relationship period, and the more that you understand their circumstances, the more likely they are to trust you with the solution. And I think that's what we're looking to get to. Many of you are leaning into a value proposition of most trusted. You earn that trust in your initial consultation by showing massive interest in the person and not the problem. And if you're looking to fix the problem, you'll help some of the people some of the time. If you're looking to help the person, you'll help all of the people all the time. So that's the kind of pivot and shift that we're looking at in that. Some great comments. I think it's a great comment when Erica says, thank you for writing the book. I knew there would be some gold nuggets in there. I was already teary reading the intro. So thank you, Codi, for making people cry. Jane says, redefining success is important now. Ollie says, I'd love some examples, thoughts on ways to build legacy around patient experience. What would your take on that be?
I'd love some examples or thoughts of ways to build legacy around patient experience. Gosh, we could probably have a call just about that.
I know, right?
Yeah, that's loaded. It's a great question, Ollie, for sure. I would think that similar to the vein of, in order to be of service, we have to fill our own cup as well. Similar to that, we have to know who we are as service providers. It's one of the things that I used to implore my teams, to do, is to really remember the why of what we do. And I know that gets overplayed a little bit, but it really is a very simple idea that has powerful manifestations when you spend time doing it, because when you know the why of what you're doing, and if legacy is a piece of that, really understanding what's important to you and your team and the legacy of your business or as a leader, then customers can also identify with that. They can be, those things can be infused into your conversations with them. So if you want to set a metric of always soliciting the answer to this one question because it's important to your business in terms of, and I'm not talking about like a raw metric, I'm talking about a value-based metric, something like, if you could describe one thing, Mrs. Smith, that you miss from when you had full enabled hearing to now this loss of hearing that you have, what's the one thing you're looking forward to again? And you solicited that feedback from every single person, you would have this repertoire of incredible things you were able to help your clients move towards, from this place of deficiency to this place of abundance. And those are the things that help move the needle for you as an organization as well, to understand the legacy of what you do, the why of what you do. And that why is incredibly, incredibly galvanizing. It's the thing that the front line hangs on to. I always say it's your first and your last line of defense, is to understand really who you are in business and why it is you're doing what you do. So I hope that answers the question. I could probably really talk about that one for a very long time, Ollie, because it is a loaded question, but I hope that answers it in some small way for sure.
I got something from that, and a thought that we might be able to jump on is it's very hard for a patient to focus so much on what they miss from when they had a greater level of hearing, because for many, the loss of hearing has been a very gradual experience over a period of time. It wasn't like I used to have it and now I don't, sure. like snapshot type moment. But there is a chance for you to be able to look for the moments where they experience strong levels of emotion. And I think one of the emotions you could look for is embarrassment. When was the last time that you felt embarrassed because of your inability to hear? If you ask that kind of question, what we get is a very crystallized moment. What we've done is created a motivator for change, and this could be part of our before and after. You take them through a treatment plan, you work with them over 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks, and now all of a sudden, we could be asking for moments when they felt either confident or, better still, proud, because of the fact that they could engage in their life at a greater level, because of the fact that they could connect with their days in a more important view. And we've just created those before and after legacy results and outcomes that are very real. And if we take that embarrassed pivot point, what we're doing is creating content that can talk to the masses as well, because they're like, damn, I felt embarrassed about that. Damn, I felt embarrassed. Because I think embarrassed is probably one of the greatest triggers for somebody to decide, now's the time for me to fix this.
Yeah, in fact, you're reminding me right now, Phil, of an ad campaign that we ran once. And I like being a bit edgy, even in spaces where people would expect finesse and smoothness, which in the funeral space, people definitely expect. There's no question they don't want edginess. But one of the ad campaigns that we ran once was this very, I would say, not very nice red dress on the right side of the ad, and down the left side it said, "You wouldn't want to be caught dead in this, would you?" And the idea was, unless you pre-plan, unless you state your wishes, unless you're able to articulate what you do want, you leave very important decisions up to other people. And so this idea of embarrassment made me think of that, because you wouldn't believe the response we got to that ad. People, well, first of all, they either loved or they hated it, but the people that loved it are the people we wanted to focus on. And people had said, I had never thought about funeral planning before. And all of a sudden that one ad, like 7 or 8 words, articulated to me why it's so important. Because no, I would not want to be caught dead in that dress, and not in a million years. And this is just one of the many decisions that go into planning. And so I agree with you, being able to isolate those things that, perhaps they're embarrassments, perhaps they're things that people haven't considered before. If you're able to articulate those in a way that is really meaningful, that people can hold on to, I think that's a winning strategy.
Let's get you some more questions in here as well. I'm just scanning to see what I can do to make use of our time. Manny's got what I think is a great question here. He says, I'm interested in your top 3 tips, and I'd invite you, Codi, to give as many or as few tips as you think are relevant for this, for managing the transition time from when you recognize what you want your legacy to be and then living your legacy. How do you manage that transition?
Managing the transition. First piece is definitely awareness. And the ability to have a conversation with yourself. Again, you want to sort of flash forward to the end and ask yourself, if this were it, if this was the last day and tomorrow I wasn't here, what would I want to be remembered for? See what values really pop up. Ask yourself, what would you hope people would say? Would you be, enlightened by the fact that some of the things that they said maybe you weren't even aware of? Or would you be hurt by the fact that certain things that you believe you hold very dear are not said about you? And the idea is to just slowly and gradually make sure those are infused into your interactions, into your day, basically, into your routine, into your reality, that they become part of your behavior. And that really is the first step of the transition, is awareness. And the second piece is practice, just doing it, trying to catch yourself, trying to trip up that ego conversation that will tell you this is silly, this is useless, this is not fruitful. Just go on being you. You have enough people that like you, and you do a good enough job, and you are enough. Enough is oftentimes the plight of organizations, is just thinking they are enough. It's not about enough. It's about how do you really make a difference in those that you serve, be it in your home or be it in your community or with your customers. So I would say those are the first 2. And the third is what I like to call micro-acknowledgement. And so this is taking gratitude, if you will, to the next level. So lots of us have gratitude practices. I don't know if people want to throw in the chat that they do have a gratitude practice, but a lot of people really do have that. And I did for years, but the problem was it became what I would call almost like a habit. It was just something I was doing. I wasn't really taking anything from it. I was pulling out my journal at night and I was writing 3 things I was thankful for down, and I'd look at them and I might flip back a page. I might think about it. I'd close my book, I'd put it on the bedside, and I'd go to sleep. And it became this sort of like muscle reaction. Get into bed, grab the book, open the pen, write, close, back. It was just this thing I was doing. I wasn't really taking anything from it. And then I started to realize, well, this is kind of crap. Unless I'm going to actually use this in my day to benefit me, how do I take that practice and make it usable? How do I embed it into my day? And so I termed this idea micro-acknowledgement. And it's having this omnipresent, and again, not rainbows and unicorns, but an omnipresent awareness of the things we can be thankful for. So this morning on social, I posted a pic of Phil and I. We were on a call just the other day and catching up and talking about today's inner circle. And I was just so excited to spend time with him and have these conversations. Conversations for someone who's an introvert like me at this level are things that actually fill my gas tank. So I could do this all day long. Small talk, on the other hand, maybe not so much. So I took some time just to say, super thankful, not just for the opportunity to talk to Phil, but for his loving, kind, and generous spirit. It's in the minute. It's simple. When I wake up in the morning and I open my eyes, I actually have an everyday awareness to say, another day. How lucky am I? It's these little things.
Knock. I'm not in a box today, right? Good news.
Exactly. Yes. Can anyone hear me? Response? That's a good thing. Yeah. So these little things that we can choose to be thankful for, but the truth is we go so fast now. We go faster than we've ever gone before as a global community, is to not rush past these things that are right in front of us that we can be thankful for, the people we get to talk to, the interactions we get to have, the behaviors we get to impart to the world as our gifts. All of these things we can choose in the moment to be thankful for. So I think those 3 things combined all together, they're at least a good start.
I'm going to add one thing, Codi, if you don't mind as well, in that I was a big student of Dale Carnegie's work from a very young age. And there's a leadership lesson in Carnegie's work, which is if you want to get the best out of others, then give other people a fine reputation to live up to. Great, powerful lesson.
Love it.
What I chose to do was to internalize that lesson and says, well, if I want to do a great job of leading myself, what can I do to give myself a fine reputation to live up to? So, Manny, if you're there right now thinking that you've realized you might want to make a change and that you're in that transitional period, what are some of the steps that you can lay out into the world that show the people that are part of your support community that you are making those changes? How do you make them as public displays of appreciation that other people can help you remain accountable towards? And just saying some things in public and putting it out into the world is a great way of holding you to account, to making sure that you live up to the standards that you've decided that you've reset for yourself.
Can I add something to that too, Phil?
Let's go.
So, I lived this corporate life, and for many years, I, especially as a speaker, one of the pieces of advice you often get is write a book. Write a book. It's an authority piece. Well, I tried so many times to write a damn book, and it was terrible. A business book. They were bad. I wouldn't even get past the first chapter, and I would be, these are crap, and I'd move on. And then I started to write Everyday Legacy, and it made perfect sense. And the reason it made perfect sense is I had worked in this corporate environment and seen so many incredible ideas born around the conference table. These brilliant ideas, but they lived briefly and died quickly because we didn't understand the why, and we didn't involve the key stakeholders, the front line of our business. And these ideas were some great ideas that could have moved people towards better memorialization, to have better products and services, all these great ideas. And they never went anywhere. And so when I went out on my own, when I left that corporate world, I said there's going to be one principal tenet that I'm going to evoke in all of my consulting. One of the things that is non-negotiable, and that is people first, always. And so in my consulting work, that really is this principal tenet, this thing that I subscribe to like a guiding compass. And when I wrote Everyday Legacy, at first I thought, gosh, I'm kind of writing a very personal book, and I'm writing it, maybe it's not a business book, maybe it's personal development, maybe. And I've actually had several leaders cut me off at the knees very quickly and say, this is a business book, make no mistake. It just evokes the principle you believe in, which is self-leadership above all else. Because the truth is, if we can't lead ourselves, we can't expect to lead others. And the truth is that as leaders, when we really want to get people behind our message, we have to ourselves be behind it. And that can be legacy, it can be policies and procedures, it can be ideas, innovation, creativity, whatever it is. As leaders, we have to be ahead. We have to be in charge of that. And so, this book has, I think, a lot of translations to business that I wasn't even expecting that were there, but that's because they involve self-mastery first and foremost.
I got a couple more questions before we wrap this show up, but I just want to acknowledge some of the comments that have come in from people in the chat. And it's so funny that Sunny McBride almost echoes exactly what you've been saying. She's saying, I'm enjoying Codi's comments. They're so true. I think it is sad when people do the right thing, but for the wrong reasons. It's easy to devote lots of time to your business and serving others if you do it for the joy of building relationships and changing lives. If you are just in it for the money, your life will be so unrewarding. Whether during the 20 years where I dedicated my life to raising 5 children or during the last 13 years building a stellar business, I always made time to do something for myself. You are not your business. You are who you are drives your business. Take the time to develop yourself and focus what is truly important in life. I think that's like a great echo that summarizes some of what you've been saying.
Yeah.
John Jacken here as well.
Sunny and I could be friends for sure. Yeah, that's great.
John here as well says, Codi, I really appreciate your piece about micro-acknowledgement. Building in genuine gratitude, even in small ways, into our daily interactions resonates with me personally and professionally. And I would like to figure out how to build that into my staff, even more than we already do, and in our patients. That's a great little thing to explore further, right? Is once you feel like you've got this happening for yourself, how do you ripple it out to that next layer of people?
Yeah, I mean, I will submit to you that I believe the single biggest ingredient to a successful leader is vulnerability. And that for a lot of stoic leaders, and I was one of those, is a very scary sandpapery kind of word, vulnerability, because a lot of people, when they think about leadership, don't think about giving into their perhaps weaknesses, which is a lot of times how we see vulnerability. But vulnerability is also just about being open and honest and transparent. And so if we take the same vein of thought about being from the top up, that in order to lead others, we have to lead ourselves, then we start to recognize that if we want our people to be more grateful, to be more filled with gratitude, we've got to express to them how we are grateful as leaders and what gratitude means to us. And that inevitably, by example, will evoke the same in our teams. And at least in the work that I do from a consulting perspective, when we put the culture of an organization first, that tenet of people first always, those organizations go on to do some pretty incredible things, because as a team, there's way more cohesion than there perhaps has ever been before. And that's because they're on the same page. They understand each other, their motives, their why. They have that galvanized factor, which is so critical to successful teams and organizations.
Cody, we've got a few moments left together. I want to acknowledge Manny saying that he loves the 3 p.m. tea time, to be able to take pause. If you don't understand what that is, read the book. Sally Miranda has a great comment here as well that I think starts to be able to wrap us up. She says, we are in growth mode at our office. Thank you for reminding me to take a step back and be able to see what is happening and plan for smooth transitions. I think that is huge. I have one final question for you, and while you're answering that, what I'd love to see is, for those of you that are listening, is to show some gratitude and some love towards Cody taking time out of his day to be in service of you guys today. But Cody, answer me this one question, is what happens if you don't focus on living your everyday legacy? What are the consequences of not?
Well, I mean, if we want to just be as raw and real and brass tacks about it, you die. And you don't necessarily understand the depth and the breadth of your impact while you were here. And that is a shame. I mean, I know the kind of people, Phil, that you surround yourself with. I have to assume that the inner circle are those people, game changers, the A game, the AAA team. These people want to change the world by how they show up in it. And so everyday legacy is just about a tiny pivot towards understanding the depth and breadth of that impact, and then doubling down to create a ripple effect of our gifts into the world. And it would be a real shame, as it was for that gentleman potentially that I kicked this off with, that story, for him to not have known the impact that he made on the people in that room, if that was in fact the case. But the only way that we are assured of that is by taking control of understanding the value of not leaving our legacy, but living it every single day, and understanding how that can transform who we are and dial in our purpose every single day.
Such a huge thing. And I think Jane sums it up here really well, is thank you, Cody, for your gentle wisdom. I think being gentle and wise together at the same time, knowing you as the way that I do, I think that you would take that with high praise. So yeah, what a beautiful way of being able to compliment your work. Some other great comments coming in. Cody, thank you so much for your time here today. Where can people find out more about you if they want to understand more about your work, continue the conversation, or think about where you might be able to show up in their world in a slightly different way? Where should we point them?
Yeah, I mean, across social, it's all at Codi Shewan, C-O-D-I. That's the only thing to remember, C-O-D-I, Shewan, S-H-E-W-A-N. Online, everydaylegacy.com. And from a consulting perspective, everlearnassociates.com is the consulting. So I'm findable, easy, just Google me.
Okay. One ask that I have for everybody listening in right now, if you have your phone nearby, you're watching this on a screen, take a picture of this screen that we're looking at right now, and seeing Cody do his thing. And if you want to be brave, sharing into the world, helping others be able to understand the power of how they can unlock their everyday legacy, share something on your chosen social media platform, tag Cody into the story, include the book or anything if you can do. Those little things that you can do to ripple a message further on make a huge, huge difference. And I think you'll agree, is the more people that we can bring awareness to the fact that we should be living a version of our life that we are choosing, and that rewards the right answer to that question of how do you want to be remembered, is a really important message to share with not only your immediate family and friends, but with the world as a whole. So there may well be things here you want to weave into your newsletters that you want to share with your communities so that we can all raise up with a higher level of consciousness. Cody, thank you for your time. It's always a joy to be able to spend time in your company, and I look forward to catching up with you again in person sometime soon. Any closing remarks from yourself, my friend?
None but to say thank you for having me. Time is a very, very precious commodity these days. So the fact that we started with roughly 20 people and we're ending with roughly 20 people is a huge gift. And for those of you who have taken something away, one tiny thing that you can shift, literally makes my purpose very, very clear. So thank you. Thanks for the shares on social. And most importantly, Phil, thanks to you. Thanks for having me.
Huge pleasure, buddy. I'll see you soon.
All right. We'll see you soon.
And there we have it. That is a wrap. Thank you so much for listening to the Business of Hearing podcast. Make sure you subscribe to be the first to know when a new episode goes live. If you're feeling kind enough to share your experience and leave us a 5-star review, it would mean the world to us. And if you want to learn more, then go to www.orange-grey.com for article guides and trainings specifically written for high-performing hearing care businesses. We look forward to speaking to you again soon.